Welcome to Connected. I'm your host, Haley Trimboli, and whether you are PhD curious or you're currently navigating your PhD program or you're wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within the PhD community. All right, today on Connected, we're diving into the world of STEM, leadership, and career pivots with an incredible guest, Dr. Karin Moore. Karin started her career as an engineer and software executive working for public utilities and some of the world's largest tech companies. After 2 decades in the industry, she made a bold pivot, leading the corporate world to pursue a PhD in global leadership and change at Pepperdine University. Her research focuses on women and girls in STEM, how to attract, retain, and advance them in male-dominated fields. And now she's taking that knowledge beyond academia, coaching STEM college students, leaders, and organizations on how to build cultures that truly support and retain women. So we'll talk about her journey from tech to scholar and what she's uncovered in her research and how she's using it today to really create real change. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And look at what you're doing. You're advancing our future scholars. So amazing. So great to be here.
Thank you. Where does this podcast find you today?
I am in beautiful San Diego and enjoying a February that is, to be the envy of Februarys. I lived in the cold for a little long time, so I'm a little bit gleeful when I have beautiful sunny days in February.
It is so nice. I'm in Southern California as well and have not been able to get over how beautiful the weather's been. So I can
We're
completely
blessed.
understand. Yes. So, all right. Well, let's jump right into it. And let's start with what made you decide to step away from this very successful career in software and engineering to pursue a PhD.
It was an interesting journey. It was mid-COVID, and I had loved what I was doing for about 20 years. As I grew in my career, I went from a variety of roles in software, whether it was in engineering or operations or customer success or IT. I loved it. I loved looking at the software business from all angles. And then during COVID, I was a senior director in a software company. And I was one of 3 women above senior director in a 1,200 person organization. That's just the engineering team. And things, I always assumed that the higher up you go, the easier things will get, but it actually got harder. I had a very large team. I felt very responsible for them. I was working 17-hour days. And frankly, that career, which had given me so much fulfillment and joy, was getting very discouraging. And I worked for 2 amazing women back to back, and then they left. And the days were just getting longer. And I was watching myself on Zoom calls, feeling like it's dramatic, but feeling like my soul was leaving out of my eyes. Like I've never seen myself so disconnected. And then I started feeling sensation in my upper shoulders, which is where I carry my stress. And I thought to myself, something is going on physically if I don't do something about the stress I'm processing and putting back in and process. And for what? Pushing widgets around and making gizmos or whatever. The purpose, it had started leaving for me. And so I had to have that, heart to heart with myself. And I always fall back on education when I feel like there's a personal crisis. It happened when I worked as an engineer right out of college. And similarly, but it didn't take 20 years. That one took 7 years. I felt like, this was interesting. It served its purpose. I don't want to be an engineer. I really wanted to understand the business world. And I went and got my master's in business. And that's one pivot earlier on. And this was the second pivot. I thought, well, I've always wanted to get my PhD. And is there something I want to study? And to be honest, I was surrounded by or had been back to back companies where I had seen really bad leadership. And I thought, I'm going to go and study leadership and really put theory to the practice and put names to some of these things that I'm observing. And I didn't. I don't regret a minute of it. I mean, it was the best decision for me. I left a lot of money in stock and, you know, earned income that didn't get earned, all the things, but it's still worth it because at the end of the day, especially the health sort of sensations that I was feeling, and you, as we just discussed a little bit before we started, as yoga teachers, we know our bodies really well. And when the body starts speaking to you, you have to listen. So
Mhm,
I
mhm.
feel like if I had stayed and continued to press inward all of the stress I was feeling, that it would not have been a positive outcome. I think I dodged a bullet.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what a big moment to turn inward and be able to acknowledge that and actually then feel empowered enough to actually be able to go and take action on it and
Mhm.
make the change. So you had interest in like the theory and education and you had
Mhm.
been familiar with this. Did you also have an interest in research? And I'm asking that because research is pretty fundamental to a PhD program. Like was that something as well? Like you knew that you also wanted to research before getting into the PhD program, or was it the other things that you mentioned?
I wanted to understand why women in STEM have such a tough time. And I began with women in mind, but my research actually showed that it starts when we're girls, both the positive and the negative. And that's when I fell in love with research because you go into a topic thinking already you know some things about it. And then we actually start doing the literature review and this topic, I am not unique. This has been examined for decades. I just brought a different slice to it, refreshed it so that it stays topical, and then fell in love with the process of research. Research terrified me. I come from an engineering and business background, so I don't have a liberal arts foundation. And so I had to gain the confidence through our classwork and through our processes that our school, Pepperdine, instills in us. And then I realized, wow, there's so much knowledge out there already. So before I do anything, almost anything these days, I will go look in scholarly libraries, even for the simplest assertion that someone makes. Like, that sounds not right. I'm not going to go just do a regular Google search or WebMD. I'm going to go to, National Institute of Health. I'm going to look at studies on the topic. And that's a really powerful thing because we are in a world right now where research and science is being questioned. And as a practitioner of women in STEM, as trying to provide that, science, engineering, technology promotion, when I see that, I have to take action. So I'm so grateful that I'm prepared for it right now. I couldn't have done it if I had continued to be super dramatic, toiling at my desk for the last 4 years. Instead, I was expanding my mind and disseminating knowledge, which is one of my favorite things to do now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one of the biggest things coming out from the PhD program for me also is just having those access points and knowing where to find really thorough, relevant research to be able to validate or confirm or better understand topics or things that we're hearing in the day to day and understand what's been there. And I definitely want to dive into a little later around what you said that this topic has been around for decades. Because I think other people might be thinking about that as they go into their PhD program on like, do I dive into that or not? But before I get there, so what was maybe one of the biggest uncertainties or fears that you had when going back to school after working in industry for so long? Like you had already sort of gone to an MBA program, so you
Yeah.
maybe knew what that felt like, but maybe the difference here on the PhD one.
I think there's always a little bit of worry. I'm not going to give it a stronger word than that, but worry that can I finish this? Is this sort of a flight of fancy? Am I just kind of in the mood for, starting a PhD? And then it takes time and energy and years. And there's a lot of distractions. I wanted to be there for my family. I wanted to, enjoy life, but who knew we were all going to be sequestered at home? So yet again, perfect timing. So for me, the worry was the novelty going to wear out, but I've always thought about, I love learning. Um, and even when I'm not good at something, I enjoy the process of learning. It calms me. And I figured this is just what I need. Even if I'm not a great student, even if I do nothing with this, I was willing to take the chance, even if I came out of it with just the degree and nothing else. And I go back to corporate America, I pick up where I left off. But the more I went into it, like by the end of year one, I thought, there's no turning back. I will never go back.
Mm.
For facing that to yourself is one of the hardest things because you're closing a door on an industry that has treated you pretty well. I'm grateful for it. So two things can hold at the same time. You can be grateful for the 20 years and you can still also say, I don't want that anymore.
Mhm.
So these are the things that you grapple with. And the PhD is, I'm sure you know this, it's a journey of self-actualization. You're never really done self-actualizing, but to reach that next level of what you can be, the PhD is an excellent process. Yes, the research, yes, the thesis, but just the you testing the bounds of your brain, your focus, your ability to communicate in words, feelings, but staying objective. I think it grows you in ways you didn't even realize you were going to grow.
Mhm.
But yeah, my first fear was just, am I going to lose interest? And then I'll be one of those students who never finishes.
Yeah, and I think
Not that there's anything wrong with that to your
yes.
audience.
Yes. Yes, I think that's an okay journey as well. I've heard again and again that loving learning is like one of the most foundational things. So I feel like it's validating to hear that again, but I also think you had a clear focus. Like you had your why around this topic. Like you had personally experienced it. And so I also think like having something anchored like that maybe helped you get through as well, potentially. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering if that was also a driver.
Yeah, definitely. There were a couple of topics that were swirling in my brain. One had to do with parenting.
Mhm.
And then I thought, don't push your luck. You've parented two great kids, knock on wood. Um, and but are you really qualified to come and, study parenting? And then I thought the bigger problem right now and that the world needs is this lack of women entering STEM, staying in STEM when they do, leaving STEM, lack of women academics in STEM fields. And for me, that was more troubling than, and so you had to sort of set aside ego, like, let me go tell the world what a great parent I am, versus let me go actually do something that's going to be useful for more people at the end. You do get angry when you're writing, researching. It takes moments where you have to just kind of stop, walk away, because, I look at things from the 1980s, 70s that I've experienced. People knew, we've known, we know what the issues are,
Mhm.
not maybe synthesized in the same way in my research that put it together, but we know there's sexism, sexual harassment. We know there's racism. We know it's harder for Black women and Latinas and Indigenous women to be successful in STEM careers, grossly underrepresented in the populations in school as well as in industry. That's actually the topic of my postdoc now, the extension of my PhD this year is I feel like more time and energy needs to be spent on those populations and their stories. So I feel like there's so much that's still unexplored.
Mhm.
And how do we go digging into that and really like, I wanted to bring forward some things that have been written in the 1960s, some things that have been put on shelves and now I can dust off and build on it.
Mhm.
And that was the most exciting thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, these conversations just have to keep going. I mean,
Yeah,
if nobody's diving into it, then what happens? And does it just stay historic at that point
exactly.
or yeah. So, going kind of back to like a tactical
Mhm.
question, like why Pepperdine's Global Leadership and Change program? Like what stood out to you particularly about this?
That's a great question. I love promoting Pepperdine. It's my double alma mater. It's my master's and my MBA. And here's the thing. So I wanted it to be Southern California. So in the Southern California area, we know the schools, not to disparage any schools by name. We'll just say there's a handful of schools I could have selected. I say we because it was a whole family journey. I went to school, but we, the collective, really, launched me.
Yes.
And here's what Pepperdine does that's unique. They give you the theory, they give you the insight, and then they don't try to train you in a dogma that when you get your degree and walk out the door, you've been reprogrammed to believe a different system, maybe is the right word, but I love that Pepperdine, same thing with the master's. So it's a culture at the Pepperdine level, and the graduate school models it. The Graduate School of Education and Psychology models it so well, which is we will teach you, but now you go and you practice. You define how you want to experience these theories, these models, these frameworks that we're teaching you.
Mhm.
And I have always found that to be really lovely. Also, it's a very supportive environment. In fact, one of our students yesterday said this about the qualifying exam, which I know you were also distinction with honors. Yay.
Mhm.
That they commented about how supportive their teachers are being because, we go through their papers. We comment from everything from the structure to APA. So it's that support. We're not like in tech, there's a highly competitive vibe and culture against each other.
Mhm.
And Pepperdine doesn't do that. We don't engender a culture of competition. We know everyone's on their own unique journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is hugely important for somebody to consider when they're thinking about getting into the school or where they might land is, I mean, one location, your family, that those
Yeah.
good, things of support, but what's the culture like? And understanding that maybe before you get in, so that you really understand, you're going to be committing a lot of time into that. What's the culture like and what's your support system going to be like? How are the faculty? So how would you recommend somebody explore that if they didn't have their MBA or go to the school beforehand?
Yeah. Well, I think just like we're talking, one is talk to other students. And then there are really great, and I've participated in a few of these information nights that are held fairly regularly. And they're so open to any question that a prospective student might have. And I think that openness and transparency about the experience um, is super important. And I also, I didn't realize how important the trips would be that we take as a part of the PhD program. But once I came back from Washington, D.C., which was the end of, I mean, I can go to Washington, D.C. anytime I want, right? It's about the way that they took us and the experiences that we had when we were there that is so unique to our learning. And it was at the end of the second year where you really are just like really digging deep for energy and motivation. And you're just like, what have I done? Now I'm too far from the beginning and not close enough to the end. You've got
Yeah.
to start writing your thesis. And it all just seems like it's really big and too much. And I came back from that trip completely energized with new motivation. My why became so clear. And I really attribute the pivotal moments of that trip to coming back and saying, okay, it's time to get this done. And like you, and 3 years is kind of crazy, but I really think that was what, kicked me into high gear. And then we also have programs, EIPs, the way that I did my EIPs, Excellence in Innovation project. And that is a very regimented process that if you're going to do a qualitative study for your PhD, that you go through it as a group. And that gave me a lot of confidence and the ability to push through with clarity on work pack schedules, I've never done a PhD before. Most of us haven't. So
Mhm.
everything's a mystery. How do you get a committee? Where do who do you talk to? And I didn't want any hiccups. I didn't want any mechanical problems that kept me from graduating in my desired timeline. And
Mhm.
I thought that's another way that they systemically support you.
Mhm. Mhm.
I hope that resonates because you experienced it differently, but those are the two biggies that I always talk about is that trip and the EIP program.
Yeah, and for the listeners, Pepperdine requires two trips, one international and one trip to Washington, D.C. as part of the program experience for all students to get to their completion. And then the EIP being an optional path for
Yeah.
PhD students to complete the dissertation. So, great things I think to ask when exploring schools are things like this and things to consider. Are you taking any trips? Are there other requirements beyond the academic load that align with whether you're thinking of it at the time, maybe align with your interests and could be a huge motivational point for students like it was for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, kind of last question here in the pre-PhD category, but many professionals I might think about career pivots, but they hesitate. What advice would you give someone considering a big shift like this?
A pretty practical person. And as you know, I coach women in STEM. I'm all about lining up your finances first. It would be reckless of me to tell people, fire all missiles, go do a pivot, everything's going to be fine. I don't do that. I feel like I would be remiss in my job as a coach. So the planning for a pivot should start at a time when you already have the smallest hints of dissatisfaction in the way things are going. And I had an amazing career for 15 years at Microsoft. I loved it. We needed to move back to California. I went to another software company when we moved back here, and I was like, okay. I went to another software company after that, and I thought, okay, this is not fun anymore, but I'm loving the people. I love the people I work with. I love the two women that I mentioned that I used to work for. So there was a lot of reasons I was finding ways to, inject joy, but the work itself was starting to be not so fun. And I thought to myself, okay, this is not me. I love program management. I love program management leadership. I love bringing order to chaos, especially in engineering, where we're building and shipping things and innovating. So you have to listen to that little voice that says, and that voice started 3 years before I uttered PhD to my family and really started making the plan. So listen to that voice early, start planning financially, because I was not going to come out of this regretting the financial angle of it.
Yeah.
First and foremost, it's one of the reasons, and I put this in the PhD, is why am I so adamant about women in STEM? These are some of the highest paying jobs in the, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. 103 classifications for STEM roles are some of the highest paying jobs. So if you're a STEM woman, you should be squirreling away money as much as possible, as much as you can, so that you have choices, so you have options. I'm in my 50s. I did not want to toil. We'll use that word one more time, maybe 3 more times. I didn't want it to be no more joy for my day to day. We spent a lot of time working. And so for me, the momentum started building. And then you add something like COVID and sort of the existential questions we all ask ourselves about our time on the planet. What do we really want to do with that time on the planet? And the next thing you know, you're like, you know what? Risk analysis. If this completely blows up, I will have a PhD. I will put my, tail between my legs and I will go find myself another job where I'm doing program management. Doubt it, but I'm ready for that. And that was really that internal dialogue. I was not going to put the roof over my head at risk, my children's college educations at risk, and we're women of having an honest conversation. So that the pivot has to happen when nothing else makes sense, but you have to plan for it.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I really appreciate that perspective. And I appreciate that it didn't happen overnight for you, that from the inner voice to PhD coming out of your mouth is a 3-year timeline, right?
Easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to consider. And the financial component. I've asked a lot of guests around the financial aspect of the PhD process because it's a huge commitment. And whichever path you choose, whether a traditional or kind of non-traditional, and the PhD. And so I think it's really important to highlight and think about before getting into a program.
Definitely. So I did an analysis of graduate school motivation for STEM women, but there's a 14,000 row Excel spreadsheet. If you look up Cooper 2022, he's pulled all the schools, all the graduate programs, and you can see what the return on investment is. It's 14,000 programs across 48 or so variables. And you can just pivot and see if there's an ROI in it. If you're doing it for the ROI, you want to be pivoted closer to an actual STEM PhD. If you're doing it for self-actualization and, just your own personal growth, then it doesn't even matter. You don't have to open that spreadsheet. But not a lot of them have huge ROI. That's the challenge. So we're doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for our community. We're doing this to move the conversation, to grow the body of literature. So I always tell that to people that are thinking about getting their PhD.
Yep. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up in the very beginning around the self-actualization and the identity shift that you might go through and the process and the deep dive during the PhD. That was unexpected for me.
Yeah.
And something that kind of came out of it. So I love this. Cooper 2022.
Yeah. 2022
I'll link
Cooper.
to that for anyone
Yeah.
who's interested. I think that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
Yeah. So then you got into the PhD program, like on a day-to-day basis, like what was the transition like from working in corporate to being a PhD student? Or like some of the biggest things that you could think
Yeah.
of?
Well, in tech especially, which is, where I grew up, somehow you make a lot happen in 24 hours. And I didn't know what to do with myself. So I actually started consulting through a friend of mine who has a all-woman led consulting company out of Seattle, and found myself back at Microsoft consulting. And because I'm like, I have bandwidth, I've got, kids are both off to college. COVID had kind of, died down enough that the kids could actually go back to college. So I'm like, I could do PhD and have, hold down a job. And that lasted for the first 2 years. The third year, I had to give myself grace and, kind of piece out of all things just to be able to finish writing. But that was the first moment of arrogance, was like, I could do this and work. And I have so much respect for people who do this PhD, any PhD program, and work full time. It's an ultimate juggling act. So that was the first realization. The second realization was, I'm going to have to upskill. I'm not a writer. I had to learn how to write. And that was challenging for me because the last writing class I had was freshman comp. And, it's been a while. And we engineers think in bullets, we think in lists, we think in constructs of compartmentalized boxes. So unpacking that was a whole new sense of, wow, that's in there. I'm capable. I just have to learn it. It's another skill. So giving myself the opportunity to actually, learn that and not be so hard on myself. Like, why didn't I come out of the womb knowing how to write? And we have some amazing writers in our, PhD program. And I would look at their writing and I would go, wow, how do they construct words like this? And, my husband comes from a really, an pure English speaking family. So I've always loved the way that they construct their thoughts and sentences. And as a non-native English speaker, I was like, I'm going to be found out because you can be accent free, but in the brain, there's a lot happening. So those were some of the challenges that I felt like I had to overcome. A lot of them, of course, self-inflicted wounds.
Writing is a huge one. Like the amount of writing that you have to do in a PhD program, along with other things, reading, researching, and everything. But the amount of writing can be you can have huge gaps in people's skills in that when they get into a PhD program. So you mentioned looking at other people's writing, which I think is a huge, a great thing to do. Look at what other people are writing to kind of get a sense as to other levels. But how did you help yourself how did you help yourself upskill in that area while you're already middle of a PhD program? It's not like you can take a break.
I think you find your voice. So I started realizing there are certain ways that when I write and it's objective, but you can hear the passion. The word choices become like puzzles. I remember our Dr. Brame, our chief librarian at the time, she took a first pass at my chapter 1 of my PhD thesis and she said, wow, these are damning words. And I'm like, I know, I'm so gleeful. I chose words, kept it objective, but I chose words to get your attention. This is important. And that is it's like math. Honestly, writing is another type of math for me. You just have to understand, lock into the thought. And it was hard getting the inertia, that first chapter. I just felt like I would sit here and maybe 8 hours would go by and a paragraph would come out that I was happy with. And then there were days where I could write 10 pages and I was okay that they weren't great. And I could go back and polish them. I had to tell myself it's not going to come out perfect. It's iterative. And that was, I think if you're wired like me, you want it to just spill out of your brain, out of your fingers, into the keyboard, and it's boom, perfect the first time. And the fact that we read it, we reread it, we walk away, we come back the next day, we reread it. And when you're sleeping, you start having ideas. You're like, wow, I want to come at this from the community college's angle because of something one of my committee members said. And I thought, that sounds like a lot of work. And then I slept on it. And the next day I was like, oh my God, that's genius. Let's talk about the role of community colleges in women in STEM. And then boom, it opened a whole new chapter in my literature review of, those are community colleges are an asset that is untapped in so many ways for women in STEM because of the backdrop of K through 12 and how they come in unprepared, then they get discouraged, then they leave. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Community college is a really nice bridge that people don't always know about or take advantage of. It just is this we went from writing to a whole different topic in a sense, but it's the writing that opens your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not rushing it. I mean, like knowing that it is a slow process so that you can maybe sleep on those things and get these huge insights like you did in this community college aspect of your dissertation that added value to your literature review. So I think having patience with yourself in the
Yeah.
writing process and knowing that some days it's a paragraph and maybe that's for a reason and you sleep on it and you come back and there's the new insight or something that you found and can latch onto.
Definitely.
So something you mentioned earlier was around the topic of women in STEM, which isn't like new, or I don't know the exact words that you use, but this people have been researching this for a while. Like, what advice or insights would you provide to somebody who has an interest in a topic that has been around or there's been a lot of research in it? Like, what insights have you gained in doing that? And what advice would you share to folks who are interested in that and maybe getting discouraged about
Yeah.
amount of research on a particular topic and how to find their angle?
I think the lived experience part of why you're interested in a topic is your secret sauce. And we can't discount, maybe everything that I wrote about, well, for sure, everything, not maybe, for sure, everything I wrote about hasn't happened to me personally, but probably about 70 to 80% of it I've personally seen. Everything from the gender pay gap to when I was a senior director, anytime we would have a new person, internal especially, come on my team or broader team, I would always look at their pay. And if their pay was below somehow because they started at the company 20 years ago and just never caught up to them, like you did something about it. So I'm reading about literature about gender pay gap. I want to highlight it, but I've also got lived experience. And I also have lived experience when I look at the motherhood wage penalty and having back-to-back children, taking 2 years off, going from making $103,000 in Costa Mesa, Southern California, to quitting, having children, going back. It took me 7 years to make 103,000 again.
Mm,
That is the motherhood wage penalty. And
mm.
so I'm talking about it, but I've lived it. I'm writing
Yeah.
about it and I recount it. Then when I'm interviewing women in STEM, my secret sauce is empathy. It's that deep knowledge. If I haven't experienced it, I've seen it for the most part. And I think that makes you a better researcher. There's actually a lady named Anne Oakley who is considered the seminal scholar of why women should interview women when the topic is about women. She did it for nurses, but then it became something that, other women who are interested in the topic of women on their PhD, they should definitely look her up. She's considered sort of the premier founder of this philosophy of, that's not to say men can't research women, but there's a depth to your lived experience that I didn't have with my MBA. My MBA was just going to promote my career forward.
Mm-hmm.
The PhD was an inward look on my own lived experience, plus helping drive change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really, anytime you approach a topic based on your lived experience, like you have that. And so when you're going into this topic, the way that you look at it is going to be different than how somebody else looked at you, how somebody else looked at it, because of your experience thus far. Whether you lived through something or have known somebody who's lived through something. So you're starting to put those pieces together. So you still have a unique touch on the topic that's
Absolutely.
been studied. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you do a PhD, you come out of it. Yes, I'm known for the STEM woman and STEM girls angle, but there is a mosaic of topics that interest me. Multilingualism interests me. I like to reflect on how I acquired languages. And I'm like, wow, now I have the skills and I can go do something with that. I love, as I mentioned, the parenting angle of it. I may never write a parenting book, but I still like, research into what makes whole children, what keeps families from having trauma, especially families that have epigenetic trauma already, right out of the womb. So those are like the things you're interested in start becoming alive and in color
Mhm.
after you've had a PhD, because
Mhm.
now you look at them clinically
Mhm.
then rather than just looking at them like, it's BuzzFeed or you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm.
It's like I'm an academic and an analyst, and I'm more thoughtful about the things that I'm examining.
Mhm.
That is a skill I did not have 4 years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, and you get to find those things out for yourself a little
Yeah.
bit more than just hearing it from the outside on the other topics, and I appreciate that because I think you still have other interests outside your dissertation or the research that you did within your PhD, and I think some people evolve from it, some people continue diving in deeper, and so I
Yeah.
appreciate you kind of acknowledging that and where the skill set can still unpack those other areas that the skills that you learned can still
Yeah,
help to explore those areas.
definitely. I think the sky's the limit, honestly.
Yeah. So your dissertation, I do want to come to the dissertation. Tell us a little bit around how you finally did land on your topic, because I think this is always a big question. Like, if you have the choice, how do I find the right topic for me that I want to dive into? And what were some of the most like surprising or important findings from your dissertation?
Um, that's I'm always pleased to talk about this. So it started as a softball, success strategies and barriers for women in STEM, like so innocuous and, pretty and put a bow on it.
Mhm.
As I started researching, and I had this aha moment that my literature was digging me back to childhood. Not my childhood. Yes, I had a great childhood. A lot of why I was successful in STEM was because of my great childhood, which I discovered by researching the motivation for girls not leaving the whole pipeline, not leaving STEM from age 6 onwards, where, little boys are telling them they're not good in math, counselors, teachers, parents are telling them they're not good in math. Or the opposite, they're telling them they're great. They're attending robotics competitions with them. They're signing them up for summer camp that's STEM focused. So it's like, wow, there's so much that starts at the beginning. And so I architected my literature review to start from kindergarten and the messaging, go all the way to high school, go to college, be an early entrant into the workforce. Now you're a senior leader, and every one of the positive and negative along the journey that the research, mine as well as the literature review, was revealing. And I married those as I talked to my 18 participants and started to see some things. For example, one of my participants shared that they sued a, Fortune 50 company for sexual harassment and they won.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that story needs to be told
Mhm.
because 1 out of 18 is sounds low, except it's such an underreported issue.
Mhm.
So I was very adamant that that story was going to make it, even though statistically it's small, but in qualitative, you're able to bring those stories forward.
Mhm.
So someone reading this PhD can see themselves if they're in a similar situation and say, wow, people do win
Yeah.
when these situations happen.
Mhm.
And then when it was all said and done, I went back and retitled my paper to Resilience in the Face of Sexism. That is the root of it, all of it, from K through senior leader, K to 12 to senior leader, it's sexism.
Mhm.
Every step of the way that gets in the way of women and girls
Mhm.
attriting from STEM fields and or their interest in STEM goes away over the course of time along the journey. And that's why by the time you get to senior leader, you have 3 women in a 1,200 person engineering organization that are above senior director. So for me, it was like this revelatory experience
Mhm.
where I thought, oh, I'll have bullets. Back to the
Mhm.
bullets. I'll have bullets of good and bullets of the bad, but it wasn't that simple. It's a much more nuanced set of experiences that women in STEM fields face.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I've been the only woman in engineering classes and they're still same. The numbers haven't changed. And
Mm,
my engineering classes were 30 years ago,
mm, mhm.
more
Yeah.
than 30.
Mhm.
Anywho, we won't go
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
But that's like that was the crux of it for me. It was like, no, this needs to be told again and again and again.
Mhm. Yeah.
And now you're on the other side of your PhD, graduated. Like, how are you using this research in, your life now, in the world, etc.?
So I went to the national conference for the American Association of University Women, the college student one, a couple of years in a row now, where I've presented multiple times on STEM women. And I walked out and I was just so happy this last one in late May of 2024. And I was walking around, a friend of mine had come, a Maryland conference, really like enjoying the youth and just the energy. And in the hallway, I heard two young women say, "Did you hear the STEM woman speak?" And I'm like, they're talking about me. And that's how the name of my company came about. I was like, I am the STEM woman.
Mm,
I'm happy to take that on. I wasn't going to name my company my name. I mean, it's just such a basic name now that I've taken on my married name. My old name was like not achievable either as a business name. And I came back and I thought, I'm going to do more of this. I am going to combine my consulting, my business sense, my love of coaching and mentoring. I'm going to fold them all into each other and hang my shingle, start my own company. And I'm going to help women at every stage of their lives and college women. Because I have college aged kids right now, I see the youth and the
mhm,
challenges they have. And
mhm,
I'm like, I want to help them too.
mhm,
And so I started my business. I formed my company in October, and I've just been having a ball, going to conferences, disseminating knowledge, trying to be, thoughtful on LinkedIn about what I say. I know it's important that you're not like just ranting. I don't espouse to that way of like disseminating knowledge. It
mhm,
doesn't work for me. It doesn't go with my personality anyway.
mhm, mhm,
So just, trying to anchor into some sort of a business for myself.
yeah.
And of course, I was fortunate enough to be asked back at Pepperdine as a fellow this year. And so I've been co-teaching with Dr. Miramontes, and that's been incredibly rewarding and fun.
Mm, mhm,
Another angle of disseminating knowledge directly to students,
mhm,
whereas I'm still sort of feeling like I'm a student, but I'm also wearing a faculty hat.
mhm,
And that's been really joyful. So I'm just
mhm.
following the joy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like a lot of your worlds came together. I mean, like
Yeah.
starting a business around the MBA, the research that you're utilizing in the business, as well as just your experience in the field itself. So, when you were either starting the PhD or in the PhD, like, did you have a sense as to like, I wanted to, I was going to head toward this consulting business, or this is kind of the direction? Or were you like, I'm going to go into academia, or I don't
No
know? Like,
clue.
did you have okay.
Yeah, I honestly did not want to put pressure on myself of what next. It's not like I didn't think about it every day. I did think about it. Just like when I was home with the two kids for those 2 years, I thought every day, who's going to hire me? My skills are getting stale. How will this end? Like I'm very much wanted to have an answer to the ambiguity, but I would feel my way for the first time in my life. I'm not looking at the blueprint of what's perfection. 2.2 children and this much square foot of house and these many cars and this degree and this salary and this much money in the bank, because that doesn't make you happy. So I've been feeling my way to things that make sense for me to do. Um, and sometimes that means you say no to certain things, even if they seem lucrative. And high on my list is the people I work with. Like, I cannot tell you, I have more than met my quota of narcissists, dark triad, all of the ways that people can be cruel in the workplace. Met it, saw it, don't need any more of it. So I would do anything there's, probably 10 people that I've worked for that I would be like, whatever you need, let's go.
Mhm,
Don't need to know the scope. Just tell me where to show up.
mhm,
Um, and so that I think is paramount to whatever I do. I will
mhm.
never work for a bad boss again. So Those are some of the things that I'm just like hard no.
Yeah, yeah. That helped you make your decisions easier when the time came.
It's wonderful. So some of the, if we live in an ageist society, but let me tell you, if you follow Jane Fonda, she's having the time of her life. And she's like an idol at this point. I saw her live at the California Conference for Women last week.
Mm.
And of course, I haven't watched the SAG-AFTRA show in entirety, but I saw her acceptance speech and I'm like, that is arrival. That's
Mhm.
when you know you've arrived.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
inching my way to that kind of self-actualization.
Yeah, yeah, she's amazing. So you have a foot in academia still with your postdoctoral work at Pepperdine, and you're doing the consulting business. Like, is this a direction that you would like to stay in? Like, but trying to better understand for somebody who
Yeah.
is interested in that. Like, I want to stay in academia a little. I want to stay, maybe start my own business. Like, is that sustainable? Is that an option for someone down the line?
Yeah, I learned in my last year of PhD, I did a program called Coro, which is in Southern California, and it's wonderful. So I highly recommend people look into that. It was an executive leadership program, and there I discovered a term called portfolio career, where you're no longer badging in, badging out. Believe me, that badging in, badging out days, they matter. They pay for, the roof over your head. So this is not to disparage that. But for someone who's in my life stage, the portfolio career is like, hey, I want to do some coaching. I'm going to have my own business. I also coach with the same company that I mentioned that I worked in the first year of my PhD, it's first and second years. When it's a company that we're going to help, I work through them because I don't want the muckery of procurement teams and contracts and, it's like,
Hmm.
blah.
Yeah.
So having like architecting a life where you can do multiple things, it takes time and energy. I tell LLC my business. I had to, create all sorts of structures and scaffolding to have a portfolio career. And by no means, I don't want to delude anyone. The money is not the same as being a senior director in tech with 20 some years experience. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, if you have gotten to a place where you're comfortable and the risks are low for going at half the income that you used to earn, is it worth it? Is it worth trying? Because if you fail, what happens? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You just go back and do what you did before.
Mhm.
I know in this job market, that's a really luxury and privileged thing to say, but those set of experiences in education you had don't go away.
Mhm.
So for me, the portfolio career is perfect right now. It gives me the flexibility I need. It gives me the intellectual stimulation. I have community. I'm able to help people. Most importantly, I can help more people this way.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so what's next for you? Like anything that you can share as far as like big projects or goals that are on the horizon that you're
Yeah.
excited about right now?
I've put in abstracts for a couple of things with some peers to see if they come to fruition. One is a book chapter on multilingualism that I'm excited about. And then there's a lot of energy around women's topics, especially now. So there's some abstracts that I've put in. I'm not going to jinx it. I won't tell you about it, but I will come back and tell you about it if we get it. And then I'm going to the GCEP conference in Switzerland, where I'll talk about Black women and Latinas and Indigenous women, the meta-analysis that I'm doing on that topic, which is my Pepperdine Pepper project, the postdoc project. And I think looking 6 months into the future is probably just as much as I want to do. I've been such a planner from the beginning of time and everything just, no uncertainty. I protected myself and my heart from uncertainty for so long that I'm just willing to say, if I know what the next 6 months holds, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
plenty.
Well, I appreciate that. And we're rooting for you on the abstract. So
Thank you.
definitely keep us in the
Thanks so
loop as
much.
well as the GSCP conference
Thank
coming
you.
up. So, okay, two final questions that I ask each guest. The first one is, what's one book, podcast, or article that every PhD student should read or listen to?
Goodness. Podcasts. Let's see. Well, I'm a big, PhD student. I don't know. Well, your podcast, of course. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But I'm a big fan of multiple podcasts. I keep it sort of lively. I love Hidden Brain. I love Terry Gross on Fresh Air. I love Huberman, Say what you will about Huberman, but I do love his content. I do love Julie Louis-Dreyfus's podcast. So you sort of see some running threads. Some are mentally stimulating, some are humor, some are health. I'm a health nut. So those are my podcast arrays. And I don't know if that is a PhD centric view of the world. And then from a book perspective, I also have a nightstand full of a variety of books. I kind of read multiple books at the same time. I'm not a fast reader, which is interesting. I like to really chew on what I'm reading. Right now, I'm reading, and it's an older book, though the author came back in 2013 and redid it and added some sections. So I'm reading the 2013 version. It's called Full Catastrophe Life. And I find it, it's very thick. And I find it, I think as a yogi, you would enjoy it as well. That's how it came to me, to my visual horizon.
Okay.
But it really talks about mindfulness and the practice of harnessing your thoughts and how you look at the world. And being in tune with your thoughts are not you, they're not reality. And a lot of care needs to be taken about what are you repeatedly telling yourself. So that's how I keep it.
Yeah, I
keep it
appreciate that.
real.
I'm going to
Yeah.
look at that one for sure. And I love the podcast collection, a lot that I listen to as well. So I think I'll definitely link to all of those. Final question. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what would it be?
My younger self, just the 4 years ago younger self, or my really younger self?
I'll leave that up to you.
I would say, and what I kind of live by, which is a no regrets sort of philosophy. I'm not a maverick. I'm a scaredy cat. I'm a scaredy cat about everything. I am wired this way. Again, it's epigenetic. So you have to push yourself. You really have to push yourself beyond your fears, because there's nobody more afraid of like what could go wrong than me. I wake up, my first analysis is what's going to go wrong today. And then I have to push myself past it. So, know yourself so that if you're wired that way, still you can overcome even your own foibles. So I'm living proof of that.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely are, because I know you're doing amazing things. So for you to even say that, it's interesting to hear, because you are really fresh out of the PhD program, continuing to drive forward, submitting abstracts, making a difference, consulting in a very meaningful way. So thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing all these really, valuable insights, lots of practical advice, and really, I just think a lot of nuggets of motivation for folks, whether they're thinking about the program, in it or out of it. So
thank you
before
so much.
we wrap up, where can people connect with you or follow you or learn about your work that you're doing?
You can find me on thestemwoman.com. Super easy, thestemwoman.com. And then on LinkedIn. I don't trust myself with Instagram or anything more. All the power to you. I think LinkedIn keeps me plenty in and out of trouble. So those are the two best places.
Well, I will link to those in the show notes.
Thank
Just
you.
thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Be well.
You too. Thanks. What an amazing conversation with Dr. Karin Moore. She is doing some amazing work in the STEM field for women in particular, but just in general, really making a difference. I appreciated her insight into thinking about a PhD program and being very mindful of what that timeline might look like and things to consider. I also loved the link or the resource that she shared around the ROI on a PhD. So I will definitely share that in the notes, because I'm going to check that out. And then also around her process of being in the PhD program and learning to upskill and leaning into those areas such as writing and relying or looking at what your colleagues are doing to continue to grow in those areas, and understanding that you really can. And then after the PhD, just doing such amazing work, having a foot in academia still as a postdoc, as well as really driving forward with her consulting business. So what resonated with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a message or a comment. Thanks for tuning in to Connected today. You will find all of the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations just like this. So I'll see you next time, and stay connected.